Alright, so here goes attempt 2 at recording this, because this is exactly what we needed to be doing. Um, I guess the audio didn't record for the last version of it. For whatever reason, it recorded the audio differently and didn't take in the audio into the video format. I don't know. So, we'll do this, and maybe this will be better. Maybe this will be an abbreviated version. So, last time we did this, we did the summary of what we achieved the first time we did a video of this. Was the generating of the story outline. Yes, it's National Novel Writing Month. This is a randomly generated story concept. And when we did this last time, I basically summed up the idea that these were random tables. They were randomly generated, and what we got the first time we did this was we rolled on these tables. We got fantasy and adventure. And on the fantasy table, well, first roll we got was two options, fantasy and then adventure. The fantasy sub-table, we rolled up a wuxia, which is, I believe, mispronounced by me, obviously, because I do not have the skill for tonal languages. But it's Chinese martial arts fantasy. And then the adventure, we rolled up steampunk. And then the type, we did a puzzle story. And then for the world, we got a mundane world. For the something changes, there's a cultural shift happening. The character is a noble. No adventuring class needed. The hero must gather, and I decided last time that he's gathering allies to, on the two table, we got weaken the enemy, but can they overcome a monster? We rolled on the monster table to get a hooved, mechanical, scaly humanoid, I believe, with mask. And I can't remember whether or not it was sci-fi or gore body horror. But I believe we rolled up air powers. And so that was the monster we rolled up. And that monster is preventing the goal being achieved by capturing and imprisoning. But when we first rolled the concept up, we had the hero must gather, and we chose gather characters, but what we actually rolled the first time was two options. So gather and then steal or liberate object or person. So what I felt made the most sense was the villain overcomes them at a certain point and imprisons and captures and imprisons the allies, which the hero must then liberate to then be able to free the people from the oppression of the monster. And so, because we're doing a steampunk setting, I had sort of, in the last video I posted, which had the glitch to it, whatever happened there, one of the things that I stated was I felt like let me go back to table 2. So we had the catastrophe is that the villain is not wrong. So that was one of the other things we rolled up. And so what that means for me when doing this is, because there's a cultural shift, and the cultural shift is part of the initial conflict, then the villain not being wrong can be an issue of, because this is Chinese martial arts fantasy, there's usually a theme within them of an ordinary person training and becoming powerful enough to overthrow an empire or corruption or whatever you're dealing with, the system that doesn't work for the people. There's a lot of Robin Hoody themes within the Chinese martial arts fantasy, where you have yeah, there we go, got the green screen to go away for a second. There's a lot of Robin Hoody sort of feeling to it. So you have a normal person with skills and training that makes them exceptional, fighting for the average person against a corrupt government. And so I feel like you start with the main character being a noble because that's what we rolled. It feels kind of like it's kind of going against trend, but there's a trick here. First of all, let's take a think about the villain character. I feel like it's interesting to have the villain be a female, but what we've got is mechanical, hooves, scales, humanoid, wearing a mask, sci-fi monster. So I feel like, to me, that's Terminator, but steampunk. So you have this mechanical being who's never been human. But it's grafted tissues over top of the mechanical being. And so I have this feeling of like a female character who's a thinking machine covered in Frankenstein cobbled together flesh of mythical beings that give them power. My first instinct was to go the route of like a Keelan or Kieran, which is like a, not quite, but it's sort of like a unicorn. It's a mythical pure beast that doesn't hurt anything. And they're usually depicted as sort of like a stag or a doe with silvery pearlescent scales and sort of dragony in some ways. And I feel like it feels wrong to have one of them be killed and their flesh be used in the creation of a monstrosity. But I don't think we have to delve into what was actually killed to do it. I think we can just hint that the character of the villain has scales that grant them certain abilities and resistance to attack or whatever. And they have hooves. And we can kind of leave it at that. Whether they came from the same creature or multiple creatures, we don't have to detail. Just that they're cobbled together from fleshy parts over mechanical creature. But we won't even necessarily reveal that. But they gained some ability, which I think when we rolled on the monster table, we rolled up their air power. Their power being air-based. And so they gained some of their power from the mystical creatures that were cobbled together to make them. The villain is a creation of outsiders, so we have a culture clash. It's not only the culture of the industrialized steampunk setting against the rural ancient China landscape. But I feel like I want to go, and this is sort of like, this isn't going to be historical, and it's not going to take place in some usual Chinese fantasy shared landscape like some people suggest there is. This is anachronistic. This is Avatar: The Last Airbender style. Like, this isn't Earth. There is no same continents as North America and China. They are just their own countries, their own cultures, but we're doing it in the style of the Chinese fantasy martial arts stuff. So, with that out of the way, I am borrowing pretty heavily from some historical elements. So, one of the things we're going to see is outside industrialists like the East India Trade Company trying to bring in capitalistic domination of the Chinese, the biggest empire in the known world at the time. Um, so you have East India Trade Company style capital industrialists with their technology and steampunk abilities coming in to a time period which predates the Victorian era in our world. So there was a changeover between the Ming and, I don't know if it's Qing or Qing empires. There was a sort of a changeover, an overlap time of inter-empire period where there were a couple of empires that were started by peasant rebellions. So one of them is the Shun Empire, and the Shun Empire was started by a peasant uprising, and the Shun Emperor declared himself king or emperor. It's a little vague because neither of those terms were really used in China. They're the closest English equivalent, and people debate which one is the best choice to go with. But he declared himself emperor. So you have a peasant leading a peasant uprising. Well, question whether or not he's a peasant. I don't know the history of his upbringing. But he was the leader of a peasant uprising that overthrew and declared themselves an empire and became an emperor for a few years. He was an emperor for a few years before they switched over to the King Qing Empire. And so there's history there for a peasant uprising against nobles, which can be the start of their story. But there's also history of the Boxers' Rebellion, which was at the tail end of the Qing King Empire. I should stop saying it that way, but the Boxers' Rebellion was sort of another peasants' uprising, known as the Boxers' Rebellion because of their fisticuffs, their martial arts at the time known as Chinese boxing by outsiders. And that one had the influx of East India Trading Company into the region and manipulation of the empire and the structures of that empire that ultimately led to its downfall through the rebellion, and the efforts to put down the rebellion resulted in strains on the empire itself to a degree that I don't think it ever really recovered enough to be able to hold it all together. And eventually the imperial system of China fell. Now, that's all sort of like things that happened at different points in history, but we can combine them in this story element to have the villain of the story be a puppet of the outsider industrialists, looking to control the largest empire on Earth. And their attempts to do so using a marvelous puppet, the Golden Empress. Now, here's where we get into some of that information about whether or not the villain is right or wrong. They can be evil and still do not be wrong. So, the idea here is you have the ability, the progressive concept of a female empress leader leading the population and helping them overthrow the imperial system that had been something they struggled under. So you can have this concept of the villain being the outsider industrialists creating a rebel leader that they can puppet into a position of establishing a peasant empire they would control. And so that's sort of the idea I have here. Now, whether or not the villain herself is always under the domination of the puppet controllers, or whether there's some additional manipulation going on where she becomes self-aware. That, I think, is where I'm going to favor going with the story a bit. So you have this artificial intelligence, steampunk robot draped in mythical creature skins and wearing a mask, leading a peasant uprising and ultimately trying to claim the throne of the Golden Empress or the Pearl Empress or whatever her scales, silver scales, I guess would be the Silver Empress. She's now the supposed empress that is sort of the iron fist that the hero has to overthrow. But we have the hero being a noble. So how do we take the concept of a noble that we can be sympathetic with in a style of story that usually has the everyday common man fighting against the empire for the common peasant? And so I feel like the best story idea I had that worked with this, and I talked about it in the last one, which we don't have access to anymore, was the story of Anastasia, the Russian daughter of Tsar Nicholas. And that, I think, is a very good example of a peasant uprising, overthrowing an emperor, and a sympathetic look back at the empire that no longer is, and the princess, and the desire for her to, a sort of a rose-tinted glasses desire for a return to the glory days of the Russian Empire, I guess. So the idea of trying to bring back the Tsar or the Tsar's family as if it was a return to the Gilded Age of the Empire. And I feel like you can kind of touch on some of those same sympathy factors by having the main character be a child when the peasant uprising overthrows his family. He's not going to be the child of the emperor, but perhaps like a baron or something like that. And so there's a peasant uprising, and they all have to scramble to escape, and he's the only one that survives the whole conflict. Now, in Anastasia, there's a Rasputin character, the magician Rasputin, who's supposedly in league with dark forces, and he seeks to destroy the whole line that offended him in some fashion. This equivalent of Rasputin would be the Silver Empress or Golden Empress, or however we decide that's going to go. She is the Rasputin character, the undead thing. Because Rasputin and Anastasia, at least in the animated one that I remember from when I was a kid, the Rasputin character there had become essentially a lich, an undead creature of some kind. In the actual story of Rasputin in Russia, he supposedly was shot, stabbed, hung, castrated, drowned, and didn't die. And so, like, the idea that this is some unnatural thing fits really well with the idea of the unnatural creation of the Iron Empress. And that suits the story reasonably well. So that gives us when plotting a story outline, you want to have the end where you're going to end up, and that'll inform where you started, because that's the character arc or the story arc where you go from where you start to where you end. If you establish where you're supposed to end, it gives you an idea of the things that have to change to get to the end, mean that the things changed were the way they were before. So we can kind of put those pieces together. And so I feel like with those in place, we have a better sense of how we can go forward with some of this stuff that way. Now and I won't be able to do it here this time. Maybe we can do it again. Maybe we'll just redo whatever we were doing the last time. One of the things I said was, we're collecting a group of allies to go on this adventure with us. So the way this story is going to have to go, we have to collect allies, and we have to get to a point where they're captured and imprisoned, and then we have to get to a point where the hero liberates the heroes. I debated whether or not it was get together with the allies, lose the allies, and then get new allies, or liberate the same ones. But on further examination, the way we rolled it the last time was literally that he's collecting things, heroes. He loses them because they're captured and imprisoned, and then he's supposed to liberate the captured heroes. Now, we did come to the point where, and maybe we can do it again, I don't feel I need to do this one again. I debated whether or not the hero was male or female. And I rolled a d4. And the d4 came up as, I said, even is male, odd is female. And we rolled a 4. So I said even was a male hero. That's what we rolled. But we can try that again if we want. And then the other thing I rolled for on the last video was how many allies. So we'll roll up how many allies he has in this as well. So let's do that. And I debated last time how many allies could we do. I didn't feel like we should do more than 10, but I rolled a d12 anyway, because it's entirely possible that you could do a hero for each of the zodiac signs in the Chinese zodiac. You could do 10 heroes for an even number. You have what is Big Hero 6. You have Big Hero 6 from Pixar, has 6 characters that were heroes. You have the 7 Samurai or something like that. So it's like you could get at a large number. the hazard I see in that particular approach is that um, it turns it from a novel into a series because your your hero's going on an adventure to collect each of these heroes. And if you have 12 of them, you have 12 episodes in an adventure. And then you have to have those heroes lost to being captured and imprisoned and then liberated again. So you could theoretically do the lost and liberated again as an individual story. And you could have the meet and greet done in clumps. But if you have too large a number, you end up with something that like it becomes unwieldy as a individual story. So we may break it up into novels or a series of stories. And I'm not objecting to that idea. I'm reasonably comfortable with that. So let's have a little bit of gamble here. So let's do a roll again for main character, male or female. I did this already. We rolled male the first time, but that video failed. I've deleted it and removed it. So here we are with another fresh go at this. It's literally 11. It's 1:20 a.m. on 11/26/2023, and we're deciding right now how much of this story is structured in what way that I have to finish by the end of this month. I don't have to finish it, but I'm going to try. So, I rolled a d4. Evens are male, odds are female for the lead character. The villain, I feel like because of the need for the culture clash, the villain not being wrong, I feel like her being an empress in a time when patriarchy was controlling and trading women like stocks and bonds. I think that's sort of like the villain is female. The question now is the lead female or male? And then how many allies does the lead have to collect? So I'm going to roll a d4. Evens are male, odds are female. Two. So we've got another roll for a male. So we're good on that one, same as before. I would have taken a female character if we rolled another one. I'd be curious to see what I could do with that story idea. That would be very interesting, honestly. As I think about it more, there's a part of me that kind of goes like, we kind of would be good to have a female protagonist and a female antagonist, and to have the part of the struggle be that the female protagonist is trying to get by in a world that doesn't appreciate female leadership and is actively fighting the first example of female leadership that they have been forced to get into. So there's a part of me that would kind of be interested to see that. But I think, I'll go with what we rolled, but only because it's what we've rolled twice now. Okay, so rolling a 12, d12 for how many sidekicks we have. Can you see it? 4. So we've rolled 4. You saw that before I did, because I could only see it in the picture of the screen. So we've rolled a 4. So he has 4 sidekicks this time. Last time I did it, I rolled a 3. So we've got 4 guys, 4 characters for him to participate with. Now, that's basically the things we rolled up the last time. I spaced them out a little bit last time when we were looking through them. But what I feel like we have the young character who was a noble, and there's a little bit of a spiel I went on the last time when we were talking about it, where the idea of the Anastasia story, as I was analyzing and thinking about it, made me realize that Frank Herbert's Dune is kind of the Anastasia story. You have the young noble at a major event for the family is betrayed by another member of some organization, and their whole family is killed. They escape, and they're seen as a continuing threat to the new order that has taken place after their overthrow. And so there's a part of me is like, it is. It's a little bit of Anastasia, isn't it? I went, that's very interesting. And so in that model, you have Duke Leto as the beloved duke of his populace, and Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who is the equivalent of Rasputin to a degree, working to kill and eliminate the entire royal family because some vendetta he has, and failing to kill the heir to the throne of. So you've got a lot of that in there, and there was a part of me that wants to name the protagonist the young Baron, because it does kind of work. Because the other story this reminds me of, we've got the ending where we're supposed to end up, and that informs where we start. But where we go in the middle is collecting a group of people with unusual abilities that will help them weaken the enemy. That reminds me instantly of the story of Baron Munchausen. So it comes to my head to call them the Baron, because the Baron Munchausen has a group of friends: Berthold, the world's fastest runner; Adolphus, the rifleman with superhuman eyesight; Gustavus, who possesses extraordinary hearing and sufficient lung power to knock down an army by exhaling; and the fascinatingly strong Albert. And those are his 4 allies. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So there's a part of me goes like, so if we have the main character be the young Baron, and he's collecting his allies to help him in his adventures, the allies then get captured and imprisoned, and he has to rescue them, and then weaken the claim to the throne of the empress puppet of the outsiders, the outsider industrialists. And so there's a part of me is like, that works really well. I want to call him the Baron partly because of that. But there's another aspect of this that I'm sort of reminded of, where you have Braveheart and Robin Hood. You have stories of somebody who's a rebel leader who comes into a position of power. Not so much a position of power, but has abilities and is using them to oppose the oppressive regime that's in place. And in Braveheart, you have a character who becomes a rebel, finds his allies, defeats the enemy at a couple battles, gets betrayed. Now, there's no betrayal in what we rolled, so I don't think there's any betrayal involved. But then he goes on a second guerrilla campaign to seek revenge against those who betrayed him. But the equivalent for us would be, has his allies, loses his allies, must rescue his allies again, and then go and defeat the enemy. And it's got sort of Robin Hood meets his merry men. Like, if you ever read the original Robin Hood stories, he meets Little John at a bridge crossing, I believe, and he meets Will Scarlet at another location. I think it's actually Little John who meets Will Scarlet in the written stories, where he encounters them and he doesn't know that Will Scarlet is a relative of Robin Hood, like a cousin or something like that. Anyway, it's the assemblage of the crew of heroes that join Robin Hood. Um, and that sort of gathering of the crew, I kind of like. And there's the later competition in which Robin gets himself into a sticky situation. Um, but I think all in all, some kind of jumbled combination of that works out relatively nicely. So what we were working with was the young Baron. I will find another name. I will give him a proper name. Meets with individuals with extraordinary abilities that we will explore the possibility of defeating the new Empress, and in the process of that happening, they have a major setback where multiples, if not all of them, are split apart and individually imprisoned, captured and imprisoned. And I think one of the ways we can explain that away is the divide happens when it's revealed that the hero is a noble. He's one of the last nobles of the family that was overthrown. And that loss of trust is what divides them enough to be able for them to be conquered and split apart. And so I think that's a viable option there. So we've got this moment of having to have the unification of the group at the beginning where they get together without knowing he's a noble. So he's an escaped noble from the Anastasia moment. And I felt like it's possible that what we could be doing with this is doing a Tarantino Pulp Fiction Kill Bill kind of thing, where we do it out of sequence, where there may be a rescue from imprisonment and a first time meeting told in the same story, and then another one done in a different story. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same meeting and rescue. But one of the other things I haven't talked about this time, and I talked about it last time just for a brief minute, is in the Chinese martial arts style fantasy stories, oftentimes they have fantasy martial arts abilities. And those abilities are useful to us in a couple of different ways. They make them for very interesting characters, much like Baron Munchausen's sidekicks. But they're also useful in the sense that each one of them may have to require a special imprisonment. Your princess is in another castle kind of situation where each one of these sidekicks is put into a tower or a moat or something like that that keeps them captive and makes it difficult to rescue them. Except for the fact that somebody else in the group may have something that unlocks the ability to free the other people. So that's where you get this kind of puzzle story element that we rolled up as the type last time, where we rolled type of story was puzzle. If your character is seeking to liberate the fire fire-powered hero, but the fire-powered hero is kept in a bubble underneath the lake, and if their fiery hair is ever extinguished, they die. So what do? Well, you got to go rescue the ice-powered hero so they can freeze the lake, and the earth-powered hero who can punch his way to building a tunnel through the lake so that he can get to the fire hero underneath the lake. Something like that. So like there's a there's a proper sequence of rescue that must be done, and that's the puzzle that we follow. Now, it makes it a little bit trickier to do this out of sequence Tarantino thing, so I'm not sold entirely on that idea yet. But I will say, I think we've got a pretty good outline so far of Anastasia, um, Robin Hood meets his merry men, the dark of the night where we lose the heroes to the sense of betrayal because they've discovered that their ally has always been one of the royal family all along. And so they lose their trust, dividing them, making them easier to be conquered. And then we move into the hero rescuing them and liberating them from their imprisonment as a puzzle to what the right way to do that would be, followed by confronting the villain, discovering her true identity and the powers at play, and defeating her, but in the process revealing she wasn't wrong. That industrialization is of benefit to the people. Getting rid of a monarchy was of benefit to the people. Progressiveness towards the rights of women to have abilities to choose and lead wasn't wrong. It's just that they were evil when they did it. And so there's a little bit of that. So that's sort of where we were last time. It still took 42 minutes to do this whole thing this way. Hopefully we don't have this problem come back with no audio. All right, so I will upload this one in its place, and we will proceed from here.